The forest outside Santa Cruz smelled of wet pine and rot that October morning in 1987 when two college hikers stumbled over what looked like a pile of discarded clothing half buried under ferns. They almost walked past it. Then one of them noticed the hand, pale, swollen, fingers curled like claws, and screamed. The body belonged to a man later identified as Corbin Whitaker, 41, a traveling salesman from Chicago who had checked into the Whispering Pines Inn 6 days earlier and never checked out. Coroner's report listed cause of death as acute neurotoxic envenomation. The toxicology screen found traces of a venom profile matching Bothrops asper, the fur-de-lance, a Central American pit viper not native to California. The corpse was covered in dozens of small puncture wounds, arranged in irregular clusters, as though something had bitten him repeatedly while he lay dying. Necrotic tissue had eaten deep into the thighs and abdomen. No one could explain how a tropical snake had gotten into the Santa Cruz Mountains, or why it would bite a grown man more than 60 times in his sleep. The Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office opened a file. They called it Case 87-10-142, Suspicious Death, Possible Exotic Animal Involvement. They had no idea the file would grow to 4 victims, 2 perpetrators, and one of the strangest capital murder prosecutions the state had seen since the 1970s. Harlan Voss was 42, tall, narrow-shouldered, with the kind of pale blue eyes that never quite focused on the person in front of him. He had once been a licensed veterinarian in Reno until the Nevada board revoked his license in 1983 after he was caught euthanizing client animals with unapproved barbiturate cocktails to study tissue response. He moved to California with his wife, Elowen, bought the failing Whispering Pines Inn on a foreclosure auction, and turned it into a quiet bed and breakfast, catering to coastal tourists who liked solitude. Harlan kept his collection of reptiles and arachnids in climate-controlled glass cases in the basement. Diamondbacks, black widows, Brazilian wandering spiders, and one juvenile fur-de-lance he had smuggled across the border in a modified thermos 6 years earlier. Elowen Voss was 39, small-boned, with ash-blonde hair she wore in a single thick braid that reached her waist. She painted watercolors of poisonous flora, foxglove, oleander, death camas, and sold them in tourist galleries in Capitola and Monterey. Guests often complimented the little herb-drying racks she kept on the sun porch. No one ever asked why so many of the bundles were labeled only with Latin binomials and skull and crossbones stickers she made herself. They had been married 11 years. They had no children. They rarely argued in front of strangers. Most weekends, they sat together on the wide porch overlooking the redwoods, Harlan reading toxicology journals, Elowen sketching, both of them listening for the soft click of the guest room doors closing for the night. Corbin Whitaker had been their first deliberate kill. He arrived on a rainy Thursday in September 1987, paid cash for 3 nights, complained about his divorce, and asked if they had anything for insomnia. Harlan offered him a cup of chamomile with a little something extra that Elowen had brewed from her private stock. When Whitaker was snoring in room 4, Harlan slipped downstairs, retrieved a 3 cubic centimeter syringe from his collection, drew 0.8 milliliters of diluted fer-de-lance venom, and returned. He injected the dose into the meat of Whitaker's left thigh while the man slept. Then he waited. The salesman woke once, gasping, clawing at invisible insects. Harlan sat in the armchair and watched the convulsions begin. Fasciculations, then rigid spasms, finally respiratory arrest. Elowen stood in the doorway holding a sketch pad. She drew the way the veins darkened under the skin, the way the lips turned blue-black. When it was over, they wrapped the body in a tarp, drove 30 minutes into the backcountry, and arranged it under a fallen madrone so it would look like an outdoorsman who had met something unlucky. They kept the Rolex, the wallet, the wedding band, which Elowen later melted down and recast into a thin serpent bracelet she wore every day, and one of Whitaker's molars, which Harlan cleaned and added to a small glass vial labeled CW9/87. They did not kill again for almost 11 months. The money from Whitaker's accounts, cashed traveler's checks and emptied credit lines, paid off the second mortgage. Business was steady. They told themselves it had been a one-time necessity. Then, in August 1988, Leora Beaumont checked in. Leora was 27, a freelance photographer from Brooklyn who had come west to shoot redwood groves for a coffee table book. She was soft-spoken, wore vintage cardigans, smelled faintly of patchouli. She asked Elowen about local poisonous plants because she wanted authentic danger in her compositions. Elowen smiled and invited her to the herb drying room after dinner. That night, Elowen prepared a light supper: grilled vegetable tart, salad with foraged greens, chamomile honey cake for dessert. Into Leora's portion went a carefully measured blend: oleandrin concentrate, a trace of convalitoxin from lily of the valley, and an experimental alkaloid Elowen had extracted from a potted castor bean plant she kept behind the greenhouse. The dose was calibrated to cause progressive cardiac and respiratory collapse over 4 to 6 hours. Leora retired early. Around 2:17 a.m., she began vomiting. By 3:40, she was in violent seizures on the bathroom floor. Harlan found her there, still breathing in shallow gasps, pupils blown wide. He carried her to the clawfoot tub, filled it with hot water, and held her under until the struggling stopped. They told the sheriff she had slipped, hit her head, drowned. The autopsy listed accidental drowning secondary to unknown intoxication. Toxicology missed the plant toxins. The lab in 1988 was not looking for rare botanical poisons in a tourist death. They kept Leora's Nikon F3, her portfolio of black and white prints, and the silver locket with her mother's photo. Elowen pressed one of Leora's paint-stained fingers between wax paper and kept it in her private sketchbook. The third kill came in March 1989. Peregrine Langford was 68, a retired antiques dealer from Houston who collected Victorian mourning jewelry. He arrived in a restored 1967 Jaguar, paid with crisp hundreds, and spent the first evening showing Elowen his collection of jet cameos and hairwork lockets. He asked if she had ever worked with human hair in her art. She said yes. That night, they invited him to the basement for a private showing of rare botanical specimens. Peregrine descended the stairs smiling. Harlan waited behind the door with a length of braided cord Elowen had woven from dried water hemlock stems and nettles, fibers stiff enough to cut skin if pulled tight. Elowen offered him a glass of elderflower cordial laced with a massive dose of coniine and atropine. When his legs buckled, Harlan looped the cord around his throat and pulled until the hyoids snapped. They left the body hanging from a ceiling beam in the woods 2 miles away, arranged like a macabre scarecrow with arms spread and head tilted in what could be mistaken for contrition. The coroner ruled suicide. No one questioned why a man who feared heights would climb a tree to hang himself. They kept the Victorian mourning brooch set with braided hair, Peregrine's gold signet ring, and a lock of his silver hair that Elowen braided into a tiny noose and hung above her easel. The fourth kill was the one that broke them. Ronan and Isolde Caldwell were 25 and 24, married 6 weeks, on a budget honeymoon driving the Pacific Coast Highway. They arrived in late July 1990. Laughing, sunburned, taking Polaroids of each other against the redwoods. Ronan was an architectural draftsman. Isolde taught 3rd grade. They booked 2 nights. Harlan and Elowen watched them from the porch the first evening. They were too happy, too loud, too alive. On the second night, Harlan invited them to the basement to see the old electrical generator we use for backup power. It was a lie. The device waiting downstairs was a modified step-up transformer salvaged from a 1970s arc welder, wired to deliver sustained 220-volt pulses through custom copper electrodes. Harlan had tested it on pigs. The current caused instant ventricular fibrillation without visible burns if applied long enough. They lured the couple separately. First, Ronan told him the breaker box was downstairs and the lights were flickering. When he reached the bottom step, Harlan pressed the electrodes to his temples. Isolde came looking for her husband minutes later. Elowen met her at the top of the stairs, with a story about Ronan feeling faint. By the time Isolde saw her husband's body, she was already being forced down the steps. They killed her the same way. They buried both in shallow graves 3 miles apart, one near a creek, one under a fallen pine. They kept the wedding rings, Isolde's charm bracelet, Ronan's sketchbook of house plans, and 2 Polaroids they found in the couple's camera. One of them kissing against a redwood, one of Isolde laughing with ocean behind her. They might have continued. They might have stopped. Instead, they got careless. In September 1990, a former guest, an insurance adjuster named Maris Tolliver, contacted the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office. She remembered the very kind couple at Whispering Pines, but she also remembered Corbin Whitaker mentioning he was staying there the week he vanished. She had kept the inn's business card. Detectives pulled registration logs. 4 missing persons in 3 years, all guests at the same small inn. No other local hotel or motel showed the pattern. FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico prepared a profile. Likely a partnered team, one dominant, one submissive. High intelligence. Ritualistic elements masked as accidents. Possible financial motive combined with sadistic experimentation. Toxicology re-examined old tissue samples with improved gas chromatography. Plant alkaloids appeared in Leora Beaumont's liver. Coneine metabolites surfaced in Peregrine Langford's blood. A herpetologist at UC Santa Cruz identified the venom signature in Corbin Whitaker as captive-bred fer-de-lance, almost certainly not a wild bite. On October 17, 1990, a search warrant was executed at Whispering Pines Inn. In the basement, they found a locked steel cabinet containing 37 vials of venom and plant extracts, each labeled with date and victim initials. A taxidermy tray of preserved human teeth and finger bones. Elowen's private sketchbooks. 127 detailed watercolor studies of dying faces, contorted limbs, livor mortis patterns. A shoebox of jewelry, driver's licenses, traveler's checks, and Polaroids. 2 wedding rings soldered together into a grotesque double helix. A handwritten ledger in Harlan's precise block letters. Names, dates, doses, time to death, observations. Harlan confessed within 6 hours. Elowen held out for 3 days, then broke when detectives showed her the sketchbook page of Isolde Caldwell's final expression. She said only, "I wanted to capture the moment the light left." Trial began in Santa Cruz Superior Court, January 1992. Prosecutors presented 1,400 exhibits. The jury deliberated 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 4 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, multiple victims, torture, financial gain. Sentencing hearing, March 1992. Judge Geraldine O'Connell imposed death. Both were remanded to San Quentin to await execution in the gas chamber. Harlan Voss was executed on June 9, 1998. He requested no last meal, only that his venom collection be donated to a university herpetology lab. Elowyn Voss followed on February 14, 2001. Her final statement was read by her attorney. "I painted what I saw, nothing more." The Whispering Pines Inn was demolished in 1994. The lot remains empty. Locals still avoid the stretch of road where it once stood. Some say the redwoods there grow a little too straight, as though trying to stand at attention.